Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. With that, we now turn to today's topic, and that is how modern medicine rediscovered yoga. I don't know whether to call it rediscovered or discovered yoga. The idea behind rediscovered is to emphasize that yoga is not something modern medicine discovered, but yoga was always there. But then modern medicine also discovered it. Perhaps it was using some elements of it without calling it yoga long back, as all systems of medicine do. But in those parts of yoga which it was using, such as physical activity, good routine, emphasis on diet, Hippocrates said that let diet be your medicine. So, emphasis on diet, and of course, mental relaxation, which physicians, uh, even as late as William Osler, emphasized the role of the mind, that it doesn't just matter uh, what disease the patient has, what matters more is who has the disease. So the role of the patient's mind in recovery, and the will to live, the will to recover, and so on. All these things were a part of modern medicine till recently. So all this is also yoga, but it was not being called yoga. But then even this part was completely forgotten for a few decades, around 50 years, starting from the year 1900 to 1950 or so. During this period, this part was gradually forgotten. It went into an eclipse. And then we rediscovered it. So, in that sense, it was rediscovered. And then now it was rediscovered not just as these elements of yoga without calling them yoga, but it was discovered as yoga itself. Because by then, yoga had acquired a great deal of respectability and popularity. So, that's why I call it how modern medicine rediscovered yoga. But then this is only a small fringe among the the practitioners of modern medicine who uh, look at it that way. Many of them still look upon yoga as something which is quite alien to modern medicine. It is unscientific. It is a system of medicine, and that we should not be mixing up systems of medicine, and so on and so forth. And so they try to shy away from it. A large number of mainstream physicians. But then those who lead the way are always small in number, and gradually things have been changing over the last 60, 70 years since modern medicine rediscovered yoga. So let's see how it all happened. And for that, I'll make use of a PowerPoint presentation. So the topic is how modern medicine rediscovered yoga. And before I go further, my humble respects to the gurus, the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, through whose inspiration and guidance this project is being conducted. If you look at the recent history of modern medicine, we find that there were some spectacular advances during the relatively short period of around 1900 to 1950. It was in this short period, and particularly concentrated around the year 1920, that we discovered many of the germs which cause disease, and we came up with the antibiotics and vaccines which were useful in preventing and managing these infectious diseases. And it was during this period that we discovered insulin. Insulin was discovered in 1921. It was one of those rare discoveries which found an application within a year of the discovery. I think the first patient who was treated with insulin was in 1922. So it was during this period that insulin was discovered. It was during this period that much of the vitamins were discovered. And we found that it is very easy to prevent and treat vitamin deficiencies. You just pack it in a pill, pack the vitamin in a pill, administer that, and the deficiency disappears uh, with, uh, uh, with miraculous in a miraculous manner. And then it was during this period that anesthesia became safe. and therefore complex surgery became possible. It was during this period that the imaging techniques grew, and therefore we could peep into the body. And it was during this period that much of the biochemical tests, which gave a big boost to our capacity to diagnose disease, were formulated. So the result of all this was that many of the major killers of mankind, which were particularly infectious disease and nutritional deficiencies such as pellagra and beriberi, they were wiped out from those parts of the world which could benefit from these advances. And uh, you find evidence of it in literature of that period. If you read any of the novels, classical novels like those by Charles Dickens or Jane Austen, you find that most of the characters start dying at the age of 30. Hardly anyone lives beyond 50. That was the life expectancy those days. So now these parts of the world, particularly Western Europe and North America, as a result of these advances, experienced a spectacular and steep increase in the life expectancy. So within a few decades, their life expectancy increased dramatically from about 30 or 40 years to more than 70 years. History has repeated itself in India. When we became independent in 1947, our life expectancy was just a little above 30 years. Today, it is much more than 60. We are nearing, I think, 70 years of life expectancy now. Now, all this is very good, but then man has not become immortal anywhere in the world. Man has started dying of a different set of diseases. Diseases such as heart disease, uh, stroke, cancer, uh, complications of diabetes, such as renal disease, and so on and so forth. So these have become the major killers of mankind today. These are not just a different set of diseases, they are a different kind of disease. Because these diseases are not amenable to the approach which worked so well in case of infectious diseases and nutritional deficiencies and even diabetes. Earlier, people used to die of diabetes, now they die of complications of diabetes, but diabetes essentially has been conquered. So, all these killers of mankind were conquered during this relatively brief period, and they worked in terms of a formula which grew as a result of this successful application. What was the way of looking at health and disease that developed during this period, which was quite natural, because one gets euphoric and gets hypnotized by what is working. The paradigm that grew was that disease is the result of entry into the body of something harmful, like a germ, or the absence of something vital, such as a nutrient or a hormone like insulin. And all you have to do is, in case of a germ, either to prevent its entry, or if it has entered, then deal with it by being prepared in advance through a vaccine, or if it has entered and has caused disease, then give an antibiotic which will eliminate it or at least limit its growth. So that is the uh, way to deal with the entry of anything harmful into the body. And if the disease is due to something which is missing, like a vitamin or an insulin, you replace the missing element and the disease is cured. Now, this is a mathematical approach, and it worked so well that uh, that became the way physicians started thinking. And in this approach, as you can see, the patient's participation is not necessary. The power that the patient's mind has on his body can be completely forgotten. If you administer insulin, the blood sugar will come down irrespective of what the person is thinking. If a person has typhoid and you give him chloromycetin, uh, chloramphenicol, which was the first antibiotic which did wonders in case of typhoid, uh, you give that, instead of the disease lasting a month, it is cured within a week. So, or if the person has a high blood pressure, you give a drug, and with dramatic effect, the blood pressure comes down. So, this mathematical approach worked very well. And therefore, it was hoped that everything that now all the other diseases will also be conquered one by one using the same approach. But we were in for a surprise. And after the 1950s, particularly in these countries, people started dying much later. That is, instead of dying in 30s and 40s, they started dying in 70s and 80s uh, of a different set of diseases, such as heart disease, complications of diabetes, uh, cancer, stroke, and so on. But then this new set of diseases was a different kind of disease. It did not lend itself to this type of a mathematical approach. These diseases were multifactorial in nature. So many things contributed to these diseases, and therefore it had a complex causation. These diseases had a complex causation, or what we call in medicine etiology. And when we further analyzed, we found that these diseases are the result of damage which accumulates slowly over decades. Fatty streaks, we discovered very early at the age of 5. Also, a child has fatty streaks, and then they are the uh, beginning, which ends 30 or 40 years later in the blockage of arteries. If that arteries blocked are in the heart, then the person gets heart disease. If they are in the brain, the person may get a stroke. And if these arteries happen to be kidney arteries, then the person gets renal disease. So the process is the same. And of course, if it happens to the arteries in the back, the person is more likely to get back pain. But then we don't look at it so uh, seriously, because back pain is not life threatening. Whereas heart attacks, uh, stroke, and renal failure are. And therefore, we don't have a term like the back attack. When a person says that I just bent down a little to pick up a pen, and then suddenly, oh, I got a severe back pain. Now, that is actually a back attack, something like a heart attack, but doesn't kill the person. But the process is similar. One of the things that contributes to it is again the blockage of the arteries, which supply the muscles and ligaments of the back. So, anyway, that was a little digression. So, what I was trying to get at is that these diseases were a different kind of disease which were resulting from slow accumulation of damage over decades. Their causation was complex, and as this causation was understood, it was found that it lay in what eventually came to be known as lifestyle. That is, people were now uh, people. Of course, one explanation for this increased occurrence of these diseases, increased prevalence of these diseases, would be that people were living longer. If a person does not live long enough, then the chance of getting these diseases, which occur a little later in life, does not arise. And that is part of the explanation why these diseases became more prominent, because people were dying much later. But then the increase in the prevalence of these diseases was far more than could be accounted for purely by the increase in lifespan. And then, therefore, the causation could could be traced to other factors. And one of the factors, of course, was genetic. There seemed to be a tendency within the family to pass on these diseases, and that is something which, by and large, we can do nothing about. But then there were many factors which were modifiable. And what were these factors? These modifiable factors. It was found that the modifiable factors were that people were not putting in enough exercise. They were taking too much of the wrong type of food. Uh, they were smoking and drinking, and they were not sleeping enough. And accompanying all this, partly as a result of the changes which had led to this modern lifestyle, people were also uh, having perhaps more mental stress than they had in the past. So, mental stress was a major accompaniment of this modern, unhealthy lifestyle which had emerged during the Industrial Revolution and that followed, as we talked yesterday. So, we'll not go into details of how we got there to this unhealthy lifestyle over this period, starting with the Industrial Revolution and onwards. But just sort of as a reminder, one of the things that happened was that we had a lot more gadgets available. It's normally said that uh, necessity is the mother of invention. The other way around is also true. Invention is the mother of necessity. The more the instruments that are invented, the more they seem to be necessary. When there were no computers, we were comfortable without them. Now that they are there, we find that they have become a necessity. When smartphones didn't exist, WhatsApp didn't exist, we were comfortable without them. And that was not too long back. But today, they have become a necessity. So, invention is the mother of necessity. The more the things were invented, the uh, more they seem to be necessary. Some people could get them, some could not get them. Those who got them, they were under stress because of the tags that came attached to the use of these inventions. And those who could not get them, they were under stress because they wanted to get them. So mental stress on the whole went up. And therefore, there began a search for healthy lifestyles and ways of dealing with mental stress. So, for modern medicine, essentially, overcoming these new pillars of mankind boiled down to looking for healthy lifestyles and overcoming mental stress, because these were the two major factors which were contributing to this new set of diseases. And both these explorations, that is, the exploration for a healthy lifestyle and exploration for dealing with mental stress, both these explorations converged on the rediscovery of ancient disciplines like yoga. Because yoga combines a superb lifestyle, the finest lifestyle ever discovered by mankind, with very potent, infallible prescriptions for lasting mental peace. So it was a two in one. We were said looking for two things, we found both in the same thing, and that is how modern medicine rediscovered yoga. Now, why this is important to understand is because in modern medicine, looked at properly, yoga is not just a set of physical exercises. If it was that, then it would be just a close cousin of physiotherapy. Physiotherapy has always been there in modern medicine. This would be a close cousin of that. But that is not how yoga was rediscovered by modern medicine. Modern medicine rediscovered yoga as something which can help us improve our lifestyle and deal with mental stress in the most effective way. So, for modern medicine, yoga is still essentially a healthy lifestyle and a way of reducing stress. Now, you may say that, okay, but then all this does not need yoga. We can just sort of find out what we should eat, how much exercise we should take, and uh, stop smoking and drinking, and take enough sleep, and uh, use psychology or counselors to deal with mental stress. Where does yoga come in? Yoga comes in because we have to ask, yes, we want our body to be fit, our mind to be fit. The two go together. That's one important thing, because uh, the body and the mind go together, even if you do not believe in the mind body relationship. When the body has pain, the person feels miserable. That is the mind. The pain may be only in one small part of the body, just the foot or the tooth, but the person as a whole is miserable. So there is a mind body connection, and we want the body and the mind to be both fit. On the other hand, if a person is worried, his body feels limp, he doesn't feel like doing anything. A depressed person just goes into a corner and sits there without talking, without trying to do anything. So, which means that the mind affects the body. So, we want the body and the mind to be fit. But then, why do we want it to be fit? May look like a ridiculous question. Uh, who wants to be sick? So, to want a healthy body and mind doesn't require a reason. But then, let's try to paraphrase the question, say, what for? What is the purpose for getting a healthy body and mind? That is where yoga comes in. We want a healthy body and mind so that we can have the right equipment for living our life, which is meaningful, purposeful, which has a proper goal. That is why we want our body and mind to be fit, which means the body and the mind are instruments, and the instruments should be in a good shape. But what is it that the instruments should be doing? The instruments should be doing what they're expected to do, what they are supposed to do. And for that, we find the best guidance on how to live and why we are living that way comes in yoga, in spiritual disciplines such as yoga. So, yoga is not actually a way of life, it is a way of life that emerges from a certain view of life. And what is that view of life? The view of life is the spiritual worldview, particularly as enshrined in the philosophy of Vedanta. So, Vedanta, you can say, is the science, and yoga is technology. So, Vedanta is the philosophy which is behind, underlying the lifestyle that yoga has. So, yoga is a way of life based on a certain view of life. Yoga is a lifestyle that emerges from a certain view of life. Yoga is a way of life which is a corollary to the spiritual view of spiritual way of looking at life, in which the body and the mind are mere instruments uh, which, if used properly, can make the person happier, healthier, and make the person's life more meaningful to himself and more useful for others. As the mother said, we should always have an aim, and on the quality of the aim depends the quality of life. Now, what is that high quality aim? That high quality aim, which will improve the quality of life, is an aim that is high, wide, generous, and disinterested. And that aim is to be one with the divine. Being one with the divine means what? Being one with the divine means letting our outer life reflect our divine essence. Our divine essence is the soul. So let the light of the soul get reflected in the way our body and mind work. And when they do that, of course, that's a long journey, but as they even move in the direction of that unification happening, that merger happening, as we move in that direction, we find that life starts getting much healthier and happier and meaningful. So it means that in yoga, fitness of the body and the mind is not in itself the reason why it should be so. We want a healthy body and mind, not because nobody wants to be sick, but we want a healthy and body and mind so that these instruments can be used properly under the guidance which comes from a spiritual philosophy, which is what yoga is about. And within that, the techniques fit in, and the techniques of asanas and pranayamas, because they help us in improving the equipment. Equipment is the body and the mind. They help us improve the apparatus, the quality of the apparatus, the quality of the instruments. So that is what these techniques do. So what for? Which means that what seems to be sufficient reason that I want to practice yoga because I want to be fit. I want my body and mind to be fit. Now that is not enough. That becomes only a means to a still higher end. So being fit, being the body and the mind fit is not an end in itself. It is a means to a higher end, and that higher end is a proper utilization of the body and the mind for a purpose which will be meaningful to us and useful to others. Now, does it really matter? Does it really matter whether one does it for just staying fit or does it for that higher purpose as yoga looks at it? Yes, it does matter because when we are uh, concerned with something higher, things which are lower down stop mattering. For example, if a student is concerned with his grades in class 12, so that the student can clear entrance exams and get into a good college, then the student decides, well, for some time, I will stop watching the TV, I'll reduce my use of the smartphone, and I'll stop playing, and so on and so forth. I'll sleep less. Now, all these are pleasant things. He likes them, but then he is ready to give them up for the sake of something higher. In the same way, if the goal is something higher, then many of the small things, like good food, uh, and so on. Good food and sex are the two primary sort of things which are the most difficult to eliminate. But then other small desires which normally occupy us, all these start dropping off from life. They start getting eliminated. One does not miss them. One is happy without them because one knows that all this giving up all these is contributing in some way to a higher goal. And therefore, when uh, say giving up omelets and cutlets for the sake of green vegetables, when the person does that, the person does not miss those omelets and cutlets now because the person has done it with a purpose for a higher goal, and therefore he's happy doing it. He wants to do it. Now, we talked about this yesterday. The difference is whether a person adopts a healthy lifestyle because the person has to or wants to. Now, if the person thinks that I have to do it for the sake of uh, postponing my death, for the sake of avoiding the misery of disease, when the person does it for that purpose, then the person is under stress for missing all those pleasant things. Mm. The person is taking exercise early in the morning, but the person is missing being in bed, which he finds much more comfortable. So the stress of resulting from getting up early uh, more than neutralizes the benefits of exercise. But if the person is happy taking the exercise, the person wants to take exercise because he knows that it will help the person get a fit body and mind, which in turn will contribute to a higher goal. Now, all this has become got fitted into a certain way of life, a certain philosophy of life, a certain goal which the person now has. So this larger goal matters. Small things have dropped off. They don't matter to him anymore. He doesn't want them anymore. They don't give him that pleasure anymore. Even if they give him that pleasure, he is willing to forego that pleasure without suffering for it. If it is available, when those things are available, he'll have them. When they're not available, he can do without them. Tena tena bhunjitha. Enjoy them and renounce them. How can you do both? You can enjoy them when they are available, uh, but at the same time, when they are not available, you don't miss them because you renounced them internally. In your mind, you have given them up. So you don't miss them. They are not the source of your happiness anymore. You're not dependent upon them for happiness. They are just a fleeting pleasure. If it is there, you can enjoy it. It's not a sin. After all, everybody will have some favorites, some healthy food, some food which is palatable. And again, there's no direct conflict between what is Shreyas and Prayas, what is good and what is also pleasant. For example, there is no real reason why the sweetness of dates or raisins is not as good as the sweetness of a chocolate. So, uh, one, it's just a way of looking at it. It's all in the mind. And when the mind has set itself a higher goal, then the person wants to do what is good for the body and the mind. He doesn't have to do it out of fear of disease and death. So that is the difference that it makes. So yoga as a lifestyle compared to just lifestyle modification for the sake of good health is different. Because when you do it as a part of yoga, then it is part of a philosophy. And that is what takes us beyond the simple reason of wanting to be healthy for the sake of being healthy to the next level, wanting to be healthy for the sake of being able to live a meaningful life. And that does matter. It matters because as a result of this change in the orientation, now the person wants to do something which is good for the body and mind. He doesn't do it because the person has to out of fear of disease and death. And the mind body relationship being very strong, if the person wants to do it instead of having to do it, then the effect on health is much more pronounced. So in yoga, in modern medicine, essentially a mind body approach, which means the powers of the mind working on the body. This, of course, is only still a partial view, a simpler view, a more commonly held view, but all the same, it is a partial view because of two reasons. One is that mind is something wishy-washy. Uh, Modern medicine is more of a brain-body approach rather than a mind-body approach. It is the hormones which affect the brain, the neurotransmitters and the neuromodulators in the brain, which alter as a result of the altered orientation of the mind, and that is what works on the body. That's the way modern medicine looks at it. So that is one way in which this is a simplistic approach. It's a more of a brain body approach. But then, whether you call it mind body or brain body, still it is limited, because how does the mind uh, actually alter? It alters because now it is acting more in light of the soul, the divine essence of the person. So it's a soul, mind, body approach. That is what makes it truly yoga. But anyway, we'll just leave it at that. But one has to keep these limitations of the more commonly used terminology like the mind body approach, mind body medicine. We have to keep the limitations of this in mind. One of the first persons to give a big boost to mind body medicine, who can be considered perhaps a pioneer and the founder of the way modern medicine looks at the mind body approaches such as yoga, was Norman Cousins. Norman Cousins was an educated and intelligent man who went to Russia. He was an American. He went to Russia as part of a delegation for the limitation of arms, SALT talks, strategic arms limitation talks or something. Those talks, and he was the leader of the delegation. And to cut a long story short, by the time he returned to the US, he had gone through both physical and mental stress. Uh, Physical stress of the journey, plus the last leg of the journey, the flight being overcrowded, and his missing sleep for almost 48 hours by the time he reached home, and so on. So there was physical stress, mental stress, and perhaps because of that, he came down with ankylosing spondylitis, which is an autoimmune disease. Uh, Modern medicine didn't look at it that way, because modern medicine had forgotten the mind-body relationship at that time. This happened sometime in the 1960s. By 1960s, the spectacular advances of physical medicine like antibiotics, vaccines, and insulin, and all those which I talked about, they had so hypnotized the practitioners of modern medicine that the mind body relationship had been forgotten. And therefore, they looked upon it as a disease of the immune system. And since they couldn't do much about it, they started giving him painkillers for the pain, and told him that not much else that can be done. And then, being an educated and intelligent man, he read up some literature and discovered that as long ago as the 1950s, Hans Selye had shown some relationship between the between stress and immunity. And so, he thought that, well, if my disease is that of the immune system, and stress can lead to that impairment of immunity and give rise to this disease, then uh, this perhaps is at the root of the disease. So he could understand the root of the disease better than the physicians perhaps could. And then he asked a question which modern medicine had forgotten to ask. If stress can lead to the disease, will relaxation lead to reversal of the disease? Will relaxation help in curing the disease? Now, this is a simple question, but modern medicine had forgotten to ask it. He could ask it because his mind was uncluttered by all medical knowledge. Hmm? He had a blank and open mind. And of course, along with that, the mind of a thinker. And therefore, he told the doctors, I want to leave the hospital. Uh, and then he got himself admitted to a hotel instead of a hospital, because that was much cheaper and more comfortable. And then he started watching videos which will make him laugh, comedies on the TV available in the hotel. And he literally cured his disease using a combination of laughter and vitamin C, which he took in huge doses. Why he took it, that again we'll not get into, because he felt that the painkillers were depleting his adrenals of vitamin C, And he wanted to replace that because adrenals have a role to play in the immune system. So, with this type of a logic, he took huge doses of vitamin C and along with that laughed. And he documented while doing so that 10 minutes of laughter gave him pain free existence for about 2 hours. Much better than painkillers. Painkillers have side effects. They were depleting his adrenals of vitamin C. So, why not laughter instead of that? He gave up all painkillers and just cured himself literally by using. And cure meant a lot because normally ankylosing spondylitis is a fatal disease. Only 1 in 500 recover. Only 1 in 500 are cured. And he became one out of those 500 using just a combination of laughter and vitamin C. And then he went on to write his experiences in this book, Anatomy of an Illness, uh, which became very popular and attracted the attention of the medical world. And he went on to become the first non-medical person to publish an article, a single author article in the New England Journal of Medicine. And he was invited by the University of California at Los Angeles Medical School to join on their faculty. And that meant a big move from Connecticut to California for him. And he did that because he wanted to further this cause. And he did that by influencing doctors and medical students in that medical school. And even more than that, by writing research projects which attracted grants, grants which UCLA School of Medicine could not make full use of. And therefore, UCLA School of Medicine became a center for funding research on the mind body relationship throughout the US. So many medical schools throughout the US started making use of that money, which Norman Cousins procured through his research projects, uh, so that and they could uh, do this research, which would show the relationship between the mind and the body essentially meaning the immune system of the body. And the result was that within a brief period of just about 20 years, uh, we had an entirely new discipline within modern medicine, psychoneuroimmunology. Psycho, the mind, working through the nervous system to influence the immune system. So the it was shown through many experimental studies that when we are at peace, when we are happy, then the immune system is at its best. On the other hand, when we are under chronic stress, long term stress, then the function of the immune system is impaired. So that was the science of psychoneuroimmunology, and today is considered the father of psychoneuroimmunology, Norman Cousins. So what he did was not just to show this relationship through these studies, the beginning of which was in the hospital when he showed that just 10 minutes of laughter can bring down the can give him pain-free existence and can also bring down the levels of this erythrocyte sedimentation rate. ESR comes down as a result of laughing. Now, this was a further extension of that in much greater detail by medical scientists, which he stimulated and inspired. And the result was that we had this science. Now, the importance of this science was that it built a bridge between the subjective and the objective. In the 1960s, modern medicine had become very wary of accepting anything which was subjective in nature. Oh, the mind is wishy washy. We want objective evidence, we want hard data, we want numerical data. Now, here there were studies which showed that there was a relationship between psychological causes, psychological makeup of a person, which may be subjective. It has a relationship to the immunocompetence of the person, which is objective, which can be measured through blood tests, the results of which are numerical. The data collected is numerical in nature, and you can analyze this numerical data through statistical tools and show that there's statistically significant improvement in immunocompetence as a result of being happy. So, being happy is subjective, but there is uh, statistically proven, statistically supported improvement in the immunocompetence of the person as a result of the being happy. So, psychoneuroimmunology became the bridge between the subjective and the objective. This was a big advance. So that's how he could put mind body medicine on a scientific footing. Mind body medicine is not something new. Even a layperson knows that when he's under stress, he's more likely to get an attack of common cold. Mm. When the child is under stress, that's the time he's more likely to get so called examination fever. So all this was known, but it was more through hearsay and common sense. He put it on a scientific footing, the mind body relationship, and that mattered because by 1960s and to a large extent even today, modern medicine is much more open to something which is objective, something which is concrete, which can be analyzed and uh, which is supported by statistical analysis. So he created that bridge between the subjective and the objective and put the mind body relationship on a scientific footing. So, what mind body medicine is essentially about is the power of the patient's mind, which can be used for healing the patient's body. So, if the patient has a, a positive attitude, so that he has less of stress, and further, he has faith in the healing mechanisms of the body, self healing mechanisms of the body. He has faith in the doctor who is treating him. He has faith in the system of medicine which he is using. Now, all these things contribute to the power of the patient's mind, which can be used for healing the patient's body. But then the mind needs an anchor because mind has two aspects, feeling and thinking. The feelings are volatile and the intellect is vacillating. So the volatile emotions and the vacillating intellect need an anchor to stabilize, and that anchor is the soul. If you look at this commonly recited mantra, Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Now, if you look at this, you find that the third line stands out as something not really in tune with the other three. Why put it there? What is the first line? Sarve bhavantu sukhina. Let everybody be comfortable and happy. Sarve santu niramaya. Let everybody be free from disease. Then ma kaschit dukha bhag bhavet. Let nobody have even the slightest trace of sorrow. Now, being happy, not having a disease, not having any sorrow, they go together. But what is this third line? Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Pashya, to see. So, see Bhadra, that is the auspicious, the most auspicious. Now, what is the most auspicious? The divine. So, let everybody see the most divine, most auspicious. Let everybody see the divine, the most auspicious. Now, what does seeing mean? Seeing means be aware of the presence, being aware of the presence of the divine. Now, why put that with being happy, being free of disease, and being free of sorrow? Hmm? Where does the seeing the divine, being aware of the divine come in? That, in fact, is the key line. Because if the person is in tune with the divine, and the divine resides within in the form of the soul, if the person uses that soul as an anchor for guiding his mind and body, particularly the mind, particularly the emotional part of the mind, if the person uses that awareness of the divine to channelize the powers of the mind properly, to channelize the powers of the emotional part of the being and the intellect properly, then he will be happy. He'll be happy irrespective of how many physical amenities he has been able to collect. He'll be free of disease, irrespective of how many doctors he has visited. And he will not have the slightest bit of sorrow, irrespective of what external circumstances the person has. The person will have a key to mental peace, lasting mental peace, which is completely independent of external circumstances. So, the happiness, being free of disease, and being at peace are the result of what has been said in the third line. That is, if he is aware of the divine, acting in light of the divine within, which is the soul. So, the mind body relationship is only a superficial way of looking at it. It is neither mind body nor brain body. It is soul mind body medicine, which is actually at work. And what the further ramifications of this are, we'll see in one of the subsequent sessions when we go to consciousness based medicine. But for the moment, suffice it to say that the mind is turbulent by nature, and therefore it needs an anchor, and that anchor is the soul. And if the person uses that properly as the anchor, then his happiness, being free of disease and being at peace, are automatically ensured. This is how the pioneers looked at modern medicine, looked at yoga, the pioneers in modern medicine, not as a set of physical practices. Huh? I have to keep repeating it because that is how people think of it. Yoga. Okay. Uh, for diabetes, yoga. Tell me those half a dozen practices which will cure my diabetes. Now, that is not how modern medicine looks at yoga. Hmm? Herbert Benson, who was again was influenced deeply by Maharshi Mahesh Yogi. And in fact, it was Maharshi Mahesh Yogi who got these studies initiated in his. Maharshi Mahesh Yogi requested him for those studies to show to the modern world that transcendental meditation, which Maharshi Mahesh Yogi was teaching, is actually useful. And then he agreed on the condition that even if the results are negative, he'll be free to publish them. And Maharshi agreed. And then Herbert Benson was in for a surprise. He found that it worked. And that's how he ended up coming up with the discovery of the relaxation response. That is what all happens during meditation, which leads to the relaxation response, which is quite different from the response to sleep. It's a hypometabolic state. That is, the person's metabolic rate goes down during meditation, the way it does also in sleep. But the time course of this is very different. In sleep, it happens gradually over a few hours. In meditation, within a few minutes, it comes down dramatically, and then other accompaniments of that low metabolism. And he felt that that was the physical explanation for the effects, positive effects of transcendental meditation that he observed. And he went on to study other systems of medicine, other systems of meditation, and found that they have a few things in common and all those. Some of these things we talked about perhaps in uh, the previous courses we have talked about. And so that was Herbert Benson. He did that sometime in the 1970s. So 60s, Norman Cousins, 70s, Herbert Benson. And Deepak Chopra, who became most prominent in the 1980s, uh, again looked upon it as one mode of consciousness influencing another mode of consciousness. The mind being one mode of consciousness, that one way the soul manifests, influencing another mode, that is the body. The mind is a subtle manifestation, the body is a gross manifestation. The two are not really separate. Therefore, one mode of consciousness can influence other, and that's how the mind body approach works. Dale Ornish, another pioneer who became most prominent in the 1990s. So 60s, Norman Cousins; 70s, Herbert Benson; 80s, Deepak Chopra; 90s, Dean Ornish. Dean Ornish particularly gave it a boost in the area of cardiology, but in mind body medicine in general. Uh, uh, he demonstrated through angiographically supported studies, that was again bridge between the subjective and the objective, that there is a statistically significant reduction in the narrowing of coronary arteries as a result of just 1 year of an intervention, which is based on yoga. Yoga looked at in the most comprehensive way. Let me again remind you, no, it was not again just physical practices of yoga. It was a comprehensive approach, including the elements of yoga for stress reduction, along with, of course, uh, visualization, imagery, and laughter, and humor, and so on, everything. So it was a package. It was a package which he, on the basis of which he came up with a 5-day program, and demonstrated that this 5-day program, uh, after a 1 year follow up, leads to a statistically significant reduction in the narrowing of the coronary arteries, which was a paradigm shift. Because till then, the thinking was that chronic diseases like heart disease can either uh, get worse or at the most stay the same. They cannot get any better. Self healing mechanisms exist only for acute diseases such as uh, common cold and diarrhea. But he demonstrated that there are self-healing mechanisms which can make even a chronic disease get better at the very roots. Narrowing of the coronary artery is the root of the disease, and that itself can improve as a result of this intervention, as a result of this mind body approach enshrined in yoga. So that was the importance. So this was a paradigm shift in the way modern medical people would think. Just as Norman Cousins' way of again shook sort of the way we thought, and by bridging the mind with a very physical sort of physically measurable function like the immunocompetence. He again linked the mind with again a physically demonstrable uh, thing like the percentage blockage in the coronary arteries. That percentage reduction in the narrowing was numerical data which could be analyzed statistically. So once again, that same bridge between the subjective and the objective. So that's how uh, he again can be considered one of the pioneers in uh, mind body medicine and introduction of yoga. Because all three of them introduced yoga into modern medicine, not any other mind body approach. And they were all highly qualified physicians who had done their medicine in some of the best medical schools in the world. Herbert Benson was at Harvard. Dean Ornish qualified from the Baylor School of Medicine. And Deepak Chopra is a product of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He was 1 year senior to me. He was 1 year my senior, Deepak Chopra. So they've all done their medicine from some of the best medical schools in the world. And yet they found through some circumstances, through some reflection, thinking, and so on. But whatever you may say, in the larger design, you may say that it was the divine design and modern medicine was destined to move that way. But whichever way it happened, in spite of going through a system of medicine which did not want to look at yoga, they ended up using yoga in a big way, not only in a big way, but in a very comprehensive way, the way yoga should be looked at, not just as a set of physical practices. They did not look at it that way. So when we say that now modern medicine accepts yoga, let's again rethink modern medicine accepts yoga, but how? What is the yoga modern medicine accepts? Not the yoga as a set of physical practices, not as a close cousin of physiotherapy. Yoga has been accepted by modern medicine, at least by the pioneers in mind body medicine, as a spiritual discipline. So the pioneers in mind body medicine looked at yoga as something which requires anchoring of the mind to the soul. So it was not just mind body approach to them, it was also soul mind body. It was more of a soul mind body medicine. Lasting mental peace needs anchoring to the soul. Contact with the soul helps harness the infinite intelligence of the body for healing. The body also has a consciousness. Mind, we can understand, yes, it has a consciousness and it can improve if we link it with the soul. But then when the mind is linked to the soul, what does it do to the body? How does it help? How do those neurotransmitters and all that which are released, how do they help? Why are they able to help? Because the body also has the same infinite intelligence of the divine packed into it. The only thing, it is more dormant than in the mind. And therefore, it is a more of a gross manifestation. But all the same, it is there. It is this infinite intelligence packed in the body for self healing, which is woken up, which is provided the best conditions when we use the mind body approach, rather the soul mind body approach. So, contact with the soul helps harness the infinite intelligence of the body for healing, that is, for self healing. Mind body medicine uses the capacity of one mode of consciousness, that is the mind, to influence another mode of consciousness, that is the body. So these are some of the sort of fundamentals uh, of mind body medicine, the way the pioneers in mind body medicine looked at. Now, if you want to know a little more about their personal history as well as how they brought yoga into modern medicine, we have a series of videos uh, given as I think 4 or 5 different talks uh, in the Yes Talk series. a few months back. The recordings are all there on the YouTube channel of the Yes Project, that is Yes Spirituality, a YouTube channel. And I think Aditi will be happy to share with you the links of those videos on people like Norman Cousins and Herbert Benson and Dean Ornish and Bernie Siegel and Larry Dossey and so on. So, a few videos of that type, each of them giving you a bit of their personal history, how they moved from modern medicine to this bringing this approach to modern medicine, the way they studied it, to modern medicine, the way it evolved under their leadership. It's not that they drifted from one thing to the other. They didn't drift from modern medicine to yoga. They expanded the field of modern medicine. They expanded the scope of modern medicine. They expanded the tools available to modern medicine by incorporating yoga into it, the way yoga should be looked at, by making it an integral part of modern medicine, by showing that what yoga offers leads to demonstrable objective changes in the body, which can be analyzed scientifically. And so that's how they linked up the most subtle, the most advanced uh, aspects of yoga with the data which was acceptable to modern medicine. So videos on these them as individuals are also available on Yes Spirituality YouTube channel. So now you can understand the significance of this little quote from the mother. Establish a greater peace and quietness in your body that will give you the strength to resist attacks of illness. So the real doctor is within you, but needs peace to do her best. In the older days, very often, outside the doctor's chamber was a nameplate. And in that nameplate, there was a little sliding thing which you could slide to expose either in or out. So the nameplate remained the same, but doctor's name below that either in will show or out will show, which means that the doctor is actually available inside or not available in the chamber. So it's from there that I got this idea. The doctor is in. Hmm. But then this doctor needs peace to do her best. And who is this doctor? Your soul. Eventually, your soul, the divine essence that is within. But it needs peace to do her best. That is, needs peace to tap that infinite intelligence packed in the body. But you might say that, well, there are so many studies available in which all this has not been done. The pioneers might have looked at yoga that way, but there are studies which show that these asanas help diabetes, these asanas help heart disease, and so on and so forth. Well, the fact is that those studies have contributed to popularizing yoga in modern medicine, but then they have looked at yoga in a very limited way. What they have done is to recruit, mind you, the word recruit, a certain number of subjects from generally captive populations like students, soldiers, etc. Recruit a certain number of subjects and show in them that certain physical practices of like asanas or maybe meditation or asanas plus meditation, but a very limited, well defined number of techniques which are highly standardized so that everybody is doing exactly the same thing. Standardized way of doing yoga so that you can be more scientific. Everybody followed the same protocol. And then you show its effects through a controlled experiment in which there's a group which is not doing all this. It's very difficult to find a good control for yoga, but all the same, attempts have been made. So you can have a controlled study in which you show that this particular protocol of yoga helps in reducing blood sugar or it helps in uh, bringing down the blood pressure and so on. So results are positive in those studies also. But then the way to look at it would be if so little done so half heartedly can achieve so much, then how much more can we get if we do it properly? Because in yoga, we don't recruit people. In yoga, people are inspired to get initiated. People are inspired to give a new direction to their life. Nobody gets recruited into yoga the way soldiers do, huh? Or in these research studies, patients too. So, and nobody does exactly the same thing. It's not that there's standard protocol which everybody has to follow. There's great flexibility available depending upon the inclinations and temperament and of the seeker. The maximum freedom and flexibility comes actually in integral yoga, quite comparable to the freedom and that we have in the yoga of the Gita. You can follow the approach of work, that is karma, of um, knowledge, jnana, or devotion, bhakti, or any combination of these. And if you practice any of these or a combination of these long enough and sincerely enough, you end up practicing all the three, as Sri Aurobindo has shown talked about beautifully in the essays on the Gita. So again, there's a great flexibility in how you begin. You begin with action or knowledge or devotion. So that is how you begin in yoga, with a approach which is student centered, which seeker centered. It is not a standardized approach. Otherwise, how will the study be scientific? Unless you give everybody exactly the same treatment. So a standardized protocol for everybody. Well, in science, that may be okay. Those studies have contributed. They have given the world what it wants today. But all the same, you can't really call it real yoga. Hmm? Yoga is a misnomer there. But all the same, if the asanas also work, then done in this way, then you can imagine how much more quick is possible if yoga is looked at the way it should be. Finally, this little quote from Sri Aurobindo: "Unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, with a calm and entire faith thy elements? Thou shalt find that in the end he exceeds the skill of 1,000,000 doctors." Who is that he? Dr. Divine, MD, ah, the super doctor, the master doctor. And that master doctor has a representative in us in the form of the soul, and it has a presence in every atom of our body and mind, every neurotransmitter that we have. He has a presence everywhere. The only thing is we have to let it manifest, let it express itself. So if we trust that, then we'll not be distressed by the fear of death. Without being distressed by the fear of death, can we not live to him, not as an experiment? Well, let's try this also. Not that's just an experiment. That's just a sort of I'm trying many things, so let me try this approach also. Not that way. That way it will not work. With a calm and entire faith, thy ailments. If if you do that, then you'll find in the end that he exceeds the skill of 1,000,000 doctors.
Close today's session. We end with a moment of silence and